All right, thank you. I want to welcome all of you again together and appreciate your time. We have this meeting and one more scheduled. We're hoping that by February 1st, we're going to have a recommendation ready to go to the board or
Do you want
go
half that?
to the district admin. And let's check and make sure that we've got everybody muted and everything the way we want to. Okay, let me give you an idea of where we're headed tonight. First of all, I'm going to do a quick review of the statistical look that we took when we took the kids from 1920 student population and the kids from 2021, if we saw any differences there. We'll cover that. We're going to do public comment at about 6:15, so that'll be fairly early. Rob's going to go over kind of what that public comment looks like. And so if we have anybody who wants to give public comment tonight, we'll have that opportunity. Then we had a work group that worked with the 5 maps on Tuesday. They worked hard for 90 minutes and it wasn't enough, I know, as they scrambled through, but they've come up with some really good options. I think most of you have seen some of those options already as the maps were sent out earlier this afternoon. They're going to go through and kind of talk about what different options they put together. Then we're going to break up into small groups, and the small groups will have discussions about those options and hopefully be able to identify the positives and negatives and narrow down there. We'll then come together, we'll report out from small groups, and then hopefully use a process to get us to a point to where we can get it down to maybe a couple, or at least have an indication of where we need to go or where we have a leaning of going after that. Finally, we're going to talk about, first, the district is going to kind of share what they have in line for transition, transfer, what their thoughts are coming into this. And then you'll have the opportunity to start adding feedback to that as well. And then we'll set things up for what we expect or hope will be our final meeting a week from Monday. So that's where we're headed tonight. Let's start first with the review of the boundary data. So all of the stuff that you're going to see tonight on the boundary C, D, E, and we won't see, but I think we'll talk about F. All of that data is on 1920 data. So you guys asked if we'd use 1920 data because you had all your kids then. And now we don't have a lot of those kids. And so felt like that was more representative. What we didn't know though, was if we drew boundaries with last year's students, would it be the same for this year and then on to next year and so forth? And so we took option B and we ran it with the 1920 student population and with the 2021 student population. What we found was total percentage of students in one school and the other variated by 0.5%. So it's like 4 or 5 students, insignificant or not a significant difference at all. And based on those 2 years, we're assuming that the fact we're using 2021 and all of these next scenarios will be more than adequate, or excuse me, we're using 1920, last year's data, in all of these scenarios, will give us perfectly good and accurate information that we can plan going forward with. And I know that was a concern of mine. It was a concern that you guys brought up. So I think that question's been answered. And at least when we look at it statistically, I don't think there's any worry about that at all. What that means is when we start looking now at data, we take it as whether it was last year's or this year's, it's going to be accurate, and it's going to represent kind of how our students are divided in the boundaries. Okay. Does that all make sense? Was there any questions, further questions about that? I could go on further. I actually went down and looked at demographics as well, SPED, ELL, and so forth, and they were just almost exactly the same. So, okay, that off the plate, we'll be able to move forward. I think we're going to start tonight with public comment. So Rob, I'm going to hand that over to you and to Derek, and you guys can go through that.
Okay, great. So public comment, we've been taking public comment at these meetings, or at least offering to take public comment, just as the school board does there in Silver Falls, and using kind of the same format and rules. And so I'll just walk you through that and read it off the document that they have at board meetings. So the board encourages citizens to share their ideas, opinions, raise questions, concerns, or compliments. If you wish to speak, use the chat feature to request to speak on Zoom, or email a request to feedback@silverfalls.k12.or.us. So those are the two ways that you can ask to speak in public comment. Remember that we all model the way for our students and ask that you share your thoughts in a respectful way. Anyone providing public testimony is required to state their name and address. All public testimony is limited to 3 minutes for each individual. Up to 5 minutes may be granted for groups of 3 or more with similar testimony. Please identify your group and designate one spokesperson. Due to time constraints, the maximum amount of public testimony is 10 individuals. When called, please state your name, relationship to the district, place of residence, and the subject you wish to address. The board will not hear, or this committee will not hear, personal complaints concerning district personnel or against any person connected with the school system. Public input from an individual should be new information only, and those repeating previous testimony will not be allowed to continue. So again, use the chat feature to request to speak on Zoom, or email your request to feedback@silverfalls.k12.or.us. All right, thanks. We're gonna wait a couple minutes here, probably 2 minutes or so, to see if there's anybody making that request.
The longest 2 minutes of the meeting.
I always feel like I need to fill it with some kind of, shtick, but I don't think you guys want that from me tonight. So.
I have heard a wise man recently say that the ability to sit in silence is a sign of strength. Excuse me, a sign of great strength.
Uh-oh.
Okay, Derek, have we seen anything?
We have not yet. I'm just refreshing my inbox here and watching. Certainly there have been no requests via chat. The question, will there be a second chance at the end of the meeting?
That's a good question, and we'll see how the meeting goes time-wise. If we have time at the end of it, it would be fantastic if we could open it up again. We'll see how we get through the work.
If our previous meetings are any indication, I find it probably unlikely, right? Just we've been right to the wire every meeting.
Yeah.
So people know.
Yeah. I would say in general, if you have concerns regarding the process or any feedback on work that's already been done, definitely encourage you to offer that information now. And if you would like to maybe speak on something that occurs during this meeting, we will have another meeting that we'll be able to answer for you. Yeah, so a question from Colin Scott. Can we ask questions via chat as we go? You certainly can ask those questions. We can't guarantee we'll get to all of those. And depending on the nature of them, we can try to answer those. But in terms of being able to provide direct feedback to members of the work group, that would be difficult during the meeting because they'll be doing other work.
I would also say that I hope, I don't know that we can guarantee this, but I hope that by the end of this meeting, we'll have things narrowed down to a good option or two that we can list, show maps out to public in every possible way we can. And I'm sure that will also generate some discussion. How much discussion depends on what those maps look like. And so, we won't decide anything definitively tonight because we have another meeting that we'll be able to come back. But I think we do have to come to a place to where we have a pretty strong leaning, at least in one or two directions by the end of this meeting. Okay. All right. We're going to go ahead and move on. Thanks, Rob. next section is, I said that we had a work group. You guys in your small groups at last week's meeting identified some people who'd be willing to serve on a subcommittee and meet with the 5 MAPS people. And there were, I believe, 5 or 6 people who did that. I've talked to a few, Melissa, Aaron, Joni, Dave. Who else was in on that meeting?
Nicole and Alyssa.
Nicole, that's right.
And Alyssa.
And Alyssa. All right. So from that meeting, Steve worked with 5 MAPS, and I know you guys during that meeting, 5 MAPS was manipulating the map and updating the numbers as you go. They'd try to capture an idea and then be able to move on to the next idea. And they came up with some different scenarios. And so I asked Dave if he'd be willing to kind of lead the report out, but that's not just Dave speaking. All of you will have input on this. And I hope that we get a real good feel of your thought process, because it's really going to be the catalyst. We told you that when we started this, we put those first 2 scenarios together because we needed to have something. And then you guys went from there, and it feels like, this ownership is now passing over to you as a group, trying to figure this out and doing this. And from what I've seen, I think you did some great work. So I'm going to hand it over to Dave, and I don't know who's running the slides, if it's you or Derek or whoever, but it's all yours.
Thanks, Randy. Well, let's see. It says my screen share is disabled. So do you want to run that PowerPoint?
Let me see if I can figure out why that would be here real quick for you, Dave. That should work now.
That looks better. Let me know when you can see it.
Okay, we can see it now, Dave.
All right. So thanks, Randy. I wanted to also share to the other group members, while we were going through this exercise, I was not planning to be the report out person. So I'm definitely going to ask if there's anything I missed from the group perspective. So I don't throw you under the bus, group members. Keep that in mind for the end of the meeting. I'll ask for if I missed anything. But just to recap, we did look at a couple of those initial scenarios. And from my perspective as a community member, Silverton's got some pretty unique roads and areas that we're trying to work with. As you will see in this presentation, most of the scenarios that our group talked through and are presenting look fairly close to each other. And that's not on purpose to kind of point down one direction, but as we were going through these scenarios, there was those kind of consistent geographical boundaries, the roads that we tried to manipulate some of the information. And just based off of the size of schools, based off of Mark Twain being a much less capacity school than Robert Frost, we were kind of limited on where we could draw some of those boundaries. So let me go ahead and get you through to the first slide. Here's a look at just a quick glance of those different scenarios. Scenarios B, C, and D are fairly similar. I'll talk a little bit about E in a minute. It doesn't necessarily fit the parameters of what we originally talked about, but I'll explain that a little bit more, but we decided we would throw in a different scenario to just bring up as an alternative for the group to think about. So B looks fairly similar to what we had last meeting. We asked, as a group, we kind of talked through our small group discussions, and we brought forward what were some of those issues that we saw that occurred in our small group discussions that we would want to look at a little bit closer. And we came into one of the communities up kind of just, I would say, south of Webb Lake. There was some areas where it didn't look like we were maintaining that neighborhood continuity and feel. So we had one of those. We will take a look at that here closely. Here's a good scenario B example of my screen, it's hard to see, but can you, maybe Aaron, can you see that okay, that represents scenario B?
So, hey, Dave, I don't think B actually did change. I think B is still the same because it's still got Lincoln Street cut off. So I think
Okay.
what he has in there is the original B.
Okay,
don't think
I
he
see
actually
that now up at the
changed it.
top. I can see that. Okay.
Yeah. C is the first one with a change.
Perfect. So let's take a look at that C scenario. This is taking a look at that neighborhood a little bit closer. It's still fairly close to Mark Twain boundary, but just based off of the high numbers in that small geographic area, we thought it would be interesting to propose what would that look like if those community members were a part of the Robert Frost boundary. So that's one of the ones that we're looking at here in scenario C.
Can I jump in there real quick, Dave?
Yeah.
So this scenario came out of my small group from the last meeting. And what it was actually based off of, in part, was that we felt like the original B kind of cut that neighborhood in half. And so we talked about at one point maybe moving it the line north so that more of it would go to the whole neighborhood would go to Mark Twain, or moving the whole neighborhood south so that would all go to Robert Frost. But I think the idea is to keep that whole neighborhood together.
Wonderful. Thanks, Melissa. And that was kind of where some of the decisions we made to make some changes were based off of taking a look at the boundary as a whole. Where would we see some of those conflicts possibly with those different neighborhoods? And we came across a couple more, but we will look at those in just a sec here.
Hey, Dave.
So that's one of those changes in scenario C.
Before you change from C, do you remember when we were discussing this, we had a long conversation about the 4th Street area when we talked about on all of our new maps that we were making about moving that neighborhood also to Robert Frost, and that didn't get reflected on this map. So when we actually built C, this one is a little bit different than the one that we built the other day. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
If you move to slide 6, it's that zoom in to the right of slide 6. We had originally said that for plan C, and that just didn't, I don't know, for whatever reason, it didn't stick in plan C. But we had it in our plan C.
So that would
So
be,
as we go
just to clarify, that then would be in plan C and D? That change on the right of page 6.
It was supposed to be in C, D. It was supposed to be in all of them.
All of them that we did.
Okay.
C, D, E, and F.
And I believe it's a difference of 9 kids.
Okay.
So when you're looking at those totals, it was let's see, I think, so really, if you're looking at the ones that how we intended it, E would shift 9 more kids to Robert Frost, and C would shift 9 more kids to Robert Frost, because I believe it was left out of C and E.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just clarify from my perspective that scenarios B through D all somewhat address a community possible conflict or continuity aspect. So as we discuss these at the end, where we're looking at them as a whole, all of those scenarios can be tailored and moved around slightly, because they all, we could just say yes to all of those changes and put them all in one, because they all do somewhat address potential conflicts or concerns from that community perspective. So that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
So as we move on with the rest of our discussions tonight, anything that you look at, vote on, stuff like that, just assume these changes on page 6 on the right-hand side, that was in C as well as D, even though it's not represented on that map, okay? Because
Yeah,
that was the intent of the committee.
And on E.
And
was
on
on
E,
all-
right,
it was on all.
in all of them, you're
Yeah.
right. Okay, so we'll go forward assuming, and then we'll have to get back to make that change. Again, not a huge numbers change, but we'll assume that is the same in C, D, and E. Okay, keep going, thank you.
So one slide I'm going to skip over at this point, and I'll just talk about it quickly. Scenario C, at the end, we're going to have a comparison of all the different metrics provided by the different scenarios that we ran into. Of course, given those changes, the actual numbers are gonna change slightly. But so I'm gonna skip over this till the end where we kind of talk about, and we can see the comparison aspect of it. And that goes for the same with D. Now, scenario E differs slightly than the other scenarios, and the reason for that is it involves a switch of a neighborhood from that would typically be in the Mark Twain boundary going to possibly the Butte Creek, going to Butte Creek. So our group really we were looking at the numbers related to each of the schools and trying to think through this boundary decision from a long-term perspective and thinking through the actual physical numbers of kids and the percentages of kids per school. And the group had some discussions around what would that look like in 5 years? How could we try to make the numbers work at the school where there's a little bit more room for growth for the students and possible students within that boundary? One of the options that was brought forward was to look at this, I don't know what we call this neighborhood specifically, the Abaquah.
South Abaquah.
South Abaquah, and taking a look at possible addition into the Butte Creek district. And we recognize that wasn't one of the original charters of the group to look at just maintaining those numbers, what kids were currently in those two boundaries and staying within those boundaries. But we also, as a group, we're trying to look through those numbers and say, how can we make sure those numbers stay fairly equal at each of the schools?
So just looking at it, that was 20 some students, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Could I jump in? I think that part of why we decided to look at this as an option to discuss was that we felt like everything that we were doing to get the numbers right was just shrinking Mark Twain. So the area around Mark Twain. I mean, taking, that sort of Milltown area and moving it to Frost, it's so close to Mark Twain. It just seems silly, but to get the numbers right, we felt like we were just drawing the radius closer and closer and closer. Whereas these students out here, they aren't that close to Mark Twain, and it just seemed to make some sense.
That's a good point,
Melissa. I feel like that's exactly what we discussed. Is like we just kept encroaching and encroaching on that half-mile radius, going closer, 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 just to keep including all these kids that were very far out. So
I think the other thing that we also talked about was that right now they're kind of smack in the middle between Butte Creek and Mark Twain. So it wasn't, I mean, maybe not exactly in the middle, but it seemed to make a little bit more sense, especially when considering growth of in-town schools. It seemed to take a little bit of the pressure off and allowed for a little bit more growth, while also trying to keep Robert Frost and Mark Twain. When you look at the 350 to 450, that's, pretty close to 43 to 57% at each school. So it also really helped keep those percentages in line with the caps for each school. It kind of solved several problems.
Right, and I think, didn't we also talk about how Butte Creek, we think that the enrollment there has been dropping, especially because of the new Russian school that opened. So kind of balance things out a little bit.
So seeing this one, I just have a question for the committee, just because I'm really curious about this. And
was that back to the E?
Yeah, back to E. And just sort of stuck in my head. And it is that, we've talked about not changing the boundaries, just involving, if possible, the boundaries of the two schools. And we haven't sort of raised this as a possibility community-wide at any time. And I'm just wondering what kind of discussion you had about sort of the surprise for the people in South Abaquah and how they might feel about that if this were a decision. I mean, did you guys talk about that? And that that it would be kind of a big surprise for everybody who lives out there, who probably have not participated in this process as much because they thought they were okay. I'm just curious. I just wonder if you talked about that and what you thought about it.
I don't
I
know.
think from my perspective, somewhat ran out of time to have those discussions, but more or less was thinking through the numbers aspect to be able to bring it back to the group, to have that discussion back here with the larger group, to
Great.
be able to just say, it's not, from my own perspective, it's not something I'm proposing, but I think it was something that the group wanted to have as an option to say, here are some B, C, and D options. Here's one alternative for the group to talk about, discuss, and bring up some of those concerns.
Well, great.
Yeah, I agree there, Dave. I think as the smaller group, we didn't get into those. I mean, we talked about the reasoning, like why we would do that, like we said, because we were encroaching so much just to try to keep the numbers down. But we didn't really talk about like, what would those individuals think, just because we were bringing back 4 scenarios. And so we thought we would probably need to talk about all of those.
Yeah.
And
Great.
Rob, one other point we didn't talk about, I think is worthy to discuss here, is I don't see this as being a highly developing area as far as more than just single family houses. So where some of the in-town communities, we may have to look at some of those single family residents turning into multifamily establishments, whereas out here, the numbers are probably not going to change a whole lot over the years when it comes to the actual numbers of students that occupy these houses.
Can one of you talk about, we only see that South Abequat area. What was the impact on the others? Were they the same as C and D? Did you keep the same boundaries? Were they the same as B? What's the rest of this plan look like?
I can talk to that. So currently, because we had a few little things that didn't get put into these, the intent was that that Pioneer area that we talked about, or no, not the Pioneer one, the 4th Street, that was consistent along all of them. So the only change to this one was that we moved that little area of South Abequat to Butte Creek. We had an F that also didn't make it in here that was supposed to be the same, but moving the South Abequat area to Butte Creek at the same time, also moving that Milltown area to Robert Frost. So the intent was that the bulk of the boundaries stayed the same. We just kind of played with the Milltown area and the Butte Creek area, because in trying to balance those percentages, those were the only 2 real areas that were kind of left. So it kind of seemed like it was kind of which in talking to the committee, which one is more beneficial? Does it make more sense to get the discussion going about South Abequat or Milltown? Because it kind of seemed like in the long run, when trying to figure this out for the future, it makes sense to have that conversation about South Abequat now while we're changing boundaries anyway. And it seemed to just make a little bit of sense to at least have the conversation.
So Randy, from my perspective, I think at the small group level, it was really tough, and it was more of a conversation of what comes first, the chicken or the egg. So I think as a small group looking at the numbers, we're trying to factor in the boundary based off of the current capacities of the schools and the classroom. There was a lot of discussion on how many classrooms there are available as a determining factor for where the boundaries lay. And so, as a small group, it was really hard to get past knowing where to set the boundaries and knowing, do we set the boundaries first and then allow the district to look at that information and then make adjustments related to modulars or switching services or doing things differently, or do those things shift first and then determine where the boundaries fit? So I think there was a little bit of dilemma in how do we go about the numbers aspect and setting the boundaries, and when's the appropriate time to be talking about some of the logistics aspect of it.
Right. And part of our discussion today by email that went back and so forth was, programs. And so Leslie threw out some kind of thoughts and ideas as to what programs would look like. There's a lot of details that have to be worked out. I do think it's important that we continue to look at the percent of students, whatever database we're looking at, making sure the division of students is done or looked at by percentage. And I think you've done a really nice job of that. And I know on the last slide there, Steve did a really nice job at taking each one and displaying them in a way that you could see and compare. So let's look at that just so people can get a good understanding. I think really all of these are in what you would determine an acceptable range as far as creating balance in demographics, which was a lot of what our discussion was to start with. So your guys' thoughts on the overall comparison of these?
My thoughts from the perspective of looking at our first meeting, where we set and then we spent a lot of time talking about what the community wanted and what was important for the community. In that small group where we were adjusting the bounds and taking a look at the different areas that we could set a boundary, we did not see any real drastic differences in these different categories of percent breakdown, ELL students, special education students, and where we were looking at these demographics. There was no way we could adjust a boundary where we would have that one school of haves and have-nots, or a big degree of difference with these figures.
Yeah, that you're really fortunate there, because that's actually not common in our community. When we do this, it's really hard to not create a haves and have-nots based on the way the community is organized. And so I think your data here shows that any of these statistically would be viable. So then the next question, thought?
Real quick question, Randy, on just for clarification on the raw numbers for me. So the shift that didn't get made in C, D, or E, if I understand it correctly, would move 9 more students from Mark Twain to Robert Frost. So in scenario C, you'd go 304 minus 9, right? So that would be 295. And you'd move those 9 students to Robert Frost. And so that'd be 404, is that correct? And would that happen in each of those scenarios?
Yeah, that would be all of them, because it didn't get included on any of them. It was that section in town that moved from Water Street through to 3rd or 4th Street.
Right.
I
So
think it did get included on D.
Oh, on D. Oh, yeah. So we would only shift them on C and E.
okay, so C and E, but my numbers were right on C and E, on C, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Yeah. So it
You're
should make about a
changing
it should make about a 1.5% difference with 9 kids.
And when you're looking at those percentages, when you look at, 350 divided by 800, the total of the capacity, it's really closer to 4357. So to me, it makes more sense to try to get to closer to that, to really make sure that the percentages match the capacity percentage also.
Yeah, so Aaron and I are on the same page there. We've both been looking at that, and we kept trying to figure out, why do we keep saying 4555 if we look at capacity being 350 and capacity being 450, so a total of 800, and we split that percent, that comes out to 5743. So it would seem like if we're trying to work from our capacity, that would be the percents that we would be trying to get to us.
I think there's some discussion about, what true capacity in a building is so hard to figure, because it depends so much on programs you're going to offer there, which is then what rooms are actually available and so forth. And I know that 350 was put out as the capacity, although I've also seen 375. I don't know what the right percentages were. I know that when we talked about them originally, it's 55-45. I would think that would be probably acceptable. If it went to 56-44 or something like that, that'd be fine too. And so, and I think you guys, I really commend that subgroup for their thinking being willing and courageous enough to think outside the box for E, because there would be ramifications to E, but I totally understand why you did it, and it was to solve what could be an issue going forward. So really nice job there.
Before
What
we-
I-
sorry.
Go ahead.
Before we get off the maps, I'm not sure, Dave, did we talk about the Pioneer neighborhood?
We haven't talked about 4th Street or the Pioneer neighborhood, no. And I didn't see those in those maps, so we would have to switch over to Steve's second set of maps. And I don't have them sized appropriately, so you're gonna have to bear with me here.
Yeah, you're
But-
right. It's on the second set on the zoom in ones.
So I will just say, as I'm pulling it up, we did make some adjustments. What would we consider the Pioneer neighborhood? Not necessarily to current homes. Actually, there were a couple residents, but the main adjustments were made in relationship to future development in that area. And we expanded out the Robert Frost boundary just a little bit more to factor in what we consider very, very likely potential future homes going in to that would still what we would consider be a part of the Pioneer community.
And Dave, I think there's an overlay of it on page 8 of his. It's like it shows you, it says E and B overlay, and you can see that little, don't focus on the top part, but down towards the bottom part, Dave. That's where that Pioneer cut is. See how they have them overlaid?
There we go.
So where you see that variant color, that's where we had pushed some of that new development of Pioneer to Robert Frost, knowing that it doesn't affect numbers now, but that it will affect numbers in the future.
That was also an area that we talked about, how you get into town and how then you either go right or left. It's not like you're in an area. So you felt like you had options to go either direction with those. So,
Mhm.
so that works.
Randy
Okay.
and Rob,
Yeah.
just because this has been discussed in the past in terms of getting input, there has been some input in the chat specifically during the presentation, including both from members of the work group and not. I figured I'd share the work group members comment first, and then we can talk about the non-work group members comment if you want. So Courtney shared, as a representative of rural schools, I'm not sure this is the time to change boundaries out of the current boundaries, especially with 2 meetings left. Those on South Abaquaw might want more of a say. I live on North Abaquaw and see that lines might need to change in the future, but that needs more extensive research.
Okay, so Courtney, can you unmute and talk? And because that's a really good example of someone who lives out there, and it's important that we take that into perspective as we start the discussions with small groups. So what kind of impact would this have in the South Abaquaw area? And is it something that we should delve into?
Yeah, so South Abaquaw has been looked at before for the past probably 15 years as possibly moving out to rural schools. Right now, I think that they don't realize that they would be part of this conversation, and I don't think there's enough time left for them to put their say in about that. And at the same time, that probably needs to wait until we look at the boundaries as a whole, because now that we're talking about Pioneer, possibly, or that side of town could possibly move out, the boundaries between Butte Creek and Scott Mills could change. There's just a lot more conversation that needs to happen around that.
Okay,
Randy, can I also share something as well?
sure.
And I just wanted to be really clear and re-clarify, and I appreciate you bringing that forward. I'm with you on that as well. And as our small group discussed this, we were not expecting that this information, of course, the community members that are participating in the meeting are hearing it, but we were not necessarily proposing that this boundary go out to the community. But it was, we as a small group, bringing that information back to this group as our larger group to decide if it was a viable option that we wanted to present to the community. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear, that we were not all in agreement that that was something ready to just send out saying, this is what we think the boundary should be. Instead, we were bringing it to the group to say, in order to meet the numbers, let's talk about this, and if we want to move this forward further as an option.
Well, and I think that's part of what you're going to need to talk about, continue to talk about in small groups. And there's a lot of directions you can go. You could ignore this and just keep it the way it is. You could recommend that you change it right now, or you could even talk about a transition plan that says, after this first year, or starting in the first year, new students, kindergarten, whatever. I mean, you could create a transition plan to change that if you wanted to as well. But I think you're astute to understand that this is a whole different ball of wax that you're dealing with there. If you're talking about taking a group and actually moving them to one of the rural settings, something that you need to discuss in your small groups.
It certainly is something that could be, well, it could be done now. You guys are going to make a decision on this, but it also could be something for further future consideration if you start to get too many students at Mark Twain.
Right.
So
You also have that unique setting here. Remind you about that the interdistrict, intra-district transfer stuff that you deal with gives this district a lot more flexibility than a lot of districts have. And so, at some point that area could be annexed out, but then everybody still has the opportunity to request to come back in or to go out, which it seems like, families are doing both of.
And Randy, before we get to more community or group member comments or feedback, I'd like to turn this back to you, but I just want to share one other discussion that we discussed. I'm failing to see which scenario, maybe one of the group members can help me out, but we also took a look. There's a natural geographic boundary that exists close to the downtown area between 214 and Oak Street. There's this little area that we also discussed shifting that boundary, keeping that community together, but shifting the boundary to the bottom of the hill.
Dave, I believe
And-
it's on D.
Is it on D?
It's shown currently on D.
Are you talking about the one that we talked about, Dave?
There we go.
Sure.
So notice the map changed down here. Some of this community towards the bottom of the hill switched over to the Robert Frost boundary. And we made some line adjustments, proposals down in this region too. Once again, these are all different scenarios that could be mixed together. And I'd like to turn it back over to you as that kind of rounded up the major pockets of discussion, but what we saw as potential conflicts or community community conflicts with that aspect to keep different communities together. Of course, the boundaries, there's always going to be one side and the other, and we tried to make sure we minimize that as much as possible, looking at the boundaries being where neighborhoods, the back of the fence may be the boundary instead of the same access street, having one student on one side of that access street go to one school and the other student go to the other side. So that was kind of our focus and how we looked at the boundaries.
Yeah. Well, I again want to commend this group for the work that you did. It's really tough. And I think you can probably appreciate why it didn't work to have the entire group sit down and try to manipulate this, because it's just too detailed and too time consuming. And I know you dedicated an hour and a half, and I have no doubt you could have spent another hour and a half and had plenty of things to continue to work on. And so I appreciate that. Now, with the rest of the group, what we're going to do is we're going to go into small group settings, and we're going to have discussions about these different scenarios. And hopefully, Leslie, are they in, you can just nod at me, are they in the same groups that we had last week? They're in different? Okay. So do we know if there's a committee member, subcommittee member on each of the small groups? I didn't think about that earlier. Probably not.
Randy, looking at the groups, I believe that is the case.
Okay.
Just based on the people who were just talking, I'm pretty sure we're set. And I will
Okay.
say too, we have had a couple of additional comments that may be worth reading prior to the break, but it's your call.
Okay. What I would say is you all have the chat feature right at the bottom of your screen. Instead of me reading those to you, Kim did a nice job of kind of articulating some thoughts there right after Courtney. Make sure that you go down through and read those as you get to your small groups. Take just a moment to do that, because again, it's some good input to think about. We're going to go to small groups, and when we go to small groups, let's see, it is 10 minutes to 7. We're going to do this for about 20 minutes. I'm hoping that'll be long enough to go through these scenarios. You should have the information that was emailed to you out in the charts. I want you to have discussions, and then there's 4 questions on the agenda, or 4 things that I'd like you to think about as you go through there. Positives and negatives of each of the options. And now I listed A. It's my assumption that, and I'll have to ask Melissa and Aaron, you guys, is A pretty much thrown out? I mean, you looked at that and went, that's not worth trying to tweak enough to make it happen. B's really where we have to focus. Is that right?
We kind of felt like A and B. I mean,
Okay.
Yeah.
But you build everything off B. So
yes.
so maybe A and B both are something, because you guys developed off B, C, D, and E. So let's just, for time's sake, look at options C, D, and E, and talk about the positives and negatives of those as we get those refined. And then which options, would they all be a good solution? Would none of them be a good solution? Or is there one that is the best of all the 3? Kind of give that idea. So, you know, if all of them work, great. Doesn't really matter to you one way or the other. If you think 2 of them don't work and one of them's the answer as a group, then that's what I'd want you to bring back. And then any additional changes that you'd like us to consider. And I think a lot of your discussion is going to be around the difference between C and D, and then E is quite a bit different. Melissa.
E to be included in C and E. So really the D is already included in C and E. So I think the 2 questions are about C and E.
So you think C, is that right? Aaron, Dan, the rest of you that were there. So C.
I think what she's saying is that D is this, hold on, I totally just lost my train of thought.
Got him, Aaron?
Really, the conversation needs to happen about where Milltown goes and where South Abaquah goes.
Yeah.
And those
Okay.
differences are C and E. So
Okay.
D is going to be the same as C and E both. So really we need
Okay.
to focus on C and E.
Yeah.
That makes it 1/3 easier. Good job.
I mean, a super, super easy way to think about it, you guys, because the only thing changing, like she said, is Milltown and Abaquah. C is Milltown to Robert Frost. D is Milltown to Mark Twain. E is Milltown to Mark Twain, and Abaquah to Butte Creek. That's really the only differences in the 3 plans.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? Questions of the committee before we break up into small groups? Okay. So as you can see, this was a big thing, and it's getting down to much smaller questions. And once we get through those smaller questions, we'll have a structure that we can send out to the community and say, this is what we're thinking, or these 2 things are what we're thinking, whichever your choice is, and be able to move from there. So it is about 8 minutes to 7. We're going to go to 7:15. So I'll ask you to be back at 7:15. I'd also ask you in this group to, in each of your small groups, to have a spokesperson ready to speak when they come back about what your feelings as a group were. How many groups are there, Derek?
There are 4.
Okay, so there'll be 4 groups. And again, I think Derek alluded to it earlier, we can't go to each of the groups. So if you're not a committee member and you're just kind of joining, you'll be left in this room while everybody else goes off to their own. That's just the way it goes. And they will come back. You can take a break if you like. 7:15 is when we will come back and have small committee reports, and you will find out who's in your small group, I guess, when you get there, however that works. Okay, so Derek, go ahead and send everybody to small groups. Enjoy your discussion. See you back here at 7:15. All right, welcome back, and thanks for the work that you did out there. We're going to have small group reports, and so hopefully each one of the groups identified somebody who's going to do the report out. And let's start. Were they actually numbered by group? Group number one, do you know? Derek, who is on group number one?
So group one was Aaron, Allison, Courtney, and the two Kyles.
So who is the spokesman for that? And let's go ahead and give us an idea of the following things, positives and negatives that you saw on C and E, whether you thought both options were viable or not, and which option you would prefer, and then any suggested changes. That's kind of the overview of the report. Okay, who's up?
You get me again.
Hey, Aaron.
So our group felt it was pretty important to keep Milltown together. So to keep them at Mark Twain, which took C off the table. There was a lot of discussion about the South Abaquah area, and that I think the general consensus is that hasn't been enough time to really talk about that. But we would propose maybe a smaller committee or something to really look at those kind of outlying school boundaries, or, you know, we know that that town is growing, so this is going to come up again. We also did talk about the possibility. We liked the idea of phasing it out. So, you know, that would kind of kill two birds with one stone. That would give the people some more time, but also, you know, new families or new students or whatever, maybe looking at those kiddos. We also did talk a little bit about too, though, that wondering what the boundaries would look like to Butte Creek versus Scotts Mills. So we thought it would be a good idea to have another committee talking about that. And then, so I think our consensus was D. However, I don't love that the numbers, the percentages are the closest together. But on paper, that those boundaries make the most sense. So our consensus was D.
Okay. Anybody else on the group that Aaron was in want to add some comments or thoughts of what you heard or felt in that discussion?
I just would chime in that, yeah, we did talk about those percentages being so closely aligned, but also that the future development and, you know, really near future development is strongly pointed towards the Robert Frost boundary and very little to the Mark Twain boundary. So that would probably equalize itself over 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, so that would actually help in separating those a little bit further in school size.
The
Okay.
other thing we did mention, and Kyle thought maybe that those numbers might work okay, that looking at those numbers, Mark Twain is 8% away from being at capacity, and Robert Frost was 16% away from being at capacity. So just throwing that out there.
And what you have, again, is the availability to say, you know, we're not going to transfer kids into there. And, you know, we're talking to Greg a little bit while you're gone, and he said that's been fairly common at Mark Twain, is that you don't have room to be able to allow kids to transfer in. And you have availability to manipulate or adjust that as you go. So, okay, very good. Appreciate that. Derek.
So group two was Alyssa, Christine, Kristen, Melissa, and Nicole.
And who is our spokesman for that group?
I guess it has been decided that I am the one.
Okay, Kristen, it's you.
We had a very similar conversation. We had a similar conversation as group one did. We felt strongly that Milltown needed to be kept together, and as close as they are to Mark Twain, that it was important that they stay at Mark Twain. And so that also led to the discussion about what to do with South Abaquah, and everyone is still thinking that that should be something that is discussed and considered and talked about further. I know that the meetings, there's only one more meeting. I don't know how that would look at this short time frame, but that's kind of
Okay.
what I'm thinking.
So your group would still consider E as an option for this process as opposed to waiting down the road.
Right.
Aaron kind of suggested it would be something we'd look at down the road with a different some other committee, but you're suggesting that it should still be on the table for now.
Right.
Okay.
Mhm.
Any questions or input from others who are in that group?
So Randy,
Okay.
Randy,
was D an
Yep.
option?
we were really hoping that Kevin Palmer would be able to chime in. I can't see the whole
Yeah, I can't
everybody
either.
lecture. But yeah, we thought that if it solves a problem, if we have a boundary group of 20 plus people, the time could very well be now. It's a possibly a great solution to a problem that's pretty significant. And so,
Okay.
yeah.
So I appreciate that, and let's see what the other two groups say, and then let's have a discussion about the advantages and disadvantages of talking about, South Abaquah in this case, but really impacting the boundaries of our one of our K-8s. Okay. So group 3, who do we have, Derek?
So group 3 was Joni, Liz, Maricela, and Sandra. Or
Okay,
Sandra, I apologize.
and who is the spokesman?
Me. I would have totally given this to Liz, but she had to get a child, so I got stuck with it. Okay, so we also eliminated C for the exact same reason. And I'm going to try to put this in a way that sounds nice, but also is just to the point. We don't feel like it's fair to disadvantage that neighborhood and say you're going to Robert Frost when Mark Twain is essentially their backyard. I mean, many of them use that space just as their extracurricular space. It is their neighborhood. So we just didn't feel like it was fair to do that to them. And so we wanted to keep them at Mark Twain. And then on the flip side of that, in considering E, we felt like, we have all these neighborhoods in town that are going to be, split up. People are going to have to make choices whether they're going to request a transfer. And so to just say that South Abaquah shouldn't have to be bothered kind of with that just didn't feel right. Like we felt like it should be on the table for a discussion, and we have people here to discuss it, and it should at least be an option. So D and E were definitely the options. We feel like both of them are possibilities, and we should have more discussion about which one makes the most sense. We definitely felt like, taking South Abaquah to Butte Creek, it's a capacity issue. It's not like we don't value South Abaquah in town, but we need to look at capacity. It's just a reality. And so if there is a school that has capacity to take them, and at the same time, we're trying to cut capacity to the in-town schools, then it just makes sense. And so I think where someone else asked if Kevin Palmer could speak to that, we would love to hear if he is here tonight or can speak to that. I mean, I've heard secondhand that he said they had room, but it would be nice to hear from him. And then if overall, when, the big group is not open to E right now, then we would like to look at a transition plan where possibly we keep those kids at Mark Twain for now, but every new kinder that starts at Butte Creek, or some sort of phasing out or in plan, however you want to put that, to make that our ultimate end goal eventually. We still feel like E's on the table now, but if the majority wasn't there, then looking at an alternative transition plan.
Okay, very good. Other members of that group that would like to add anything? Otherwise, we'll have Joni give us a drum solo there while we have a break since she's close.
Sorry, that's my son's game.
Okay, so fourth group, who's going to be the spokesman for that?
Is it the last group?
That
It's
is
the
the
last
last
group.
group.
Okay, so then that's us. I don't know why I got tasked with talking again, but I was tasked with our group. We had some discussion over the different scenarios. I think I'll start off with E, because there's some thoughts that haven't been shared yet from hearing others talk about that the South Abacoa area, and that is, this was our group struggled back and forth with some thoughts. We didn't really land on one conclusion, but one of the areas that we struggled with was, as a group, looking at the numbers, there is current capacity to hold those students. And so it was tough to be able to decide, yes, that should be on the plate just because there is current capacity for them. And we're not talking about a huge area. On the flip side, there was discussion about historically in the past, these type of things have been pushed out. And some people thought that it would be worthy to bring it up to discuss if we are trying to make a capacity space at Mark Twain, to be able to at least talk about it and to say, do we want to proactively look at this for not today's capacity issues, because all the scenarios looks like they have enough room to hold this year's students and last year's students, but to think through how we would make this decision work for future capacity as a possibility.
Very good.
So a couple of the other areas, I think we didn't decide any real decisions different than what I've heard the others talk about C and D. We also had some discussion around that Mill Creek area staying at Mark Twain. Also had discussions about them moving out into Robert Frost. And that was basically just as a numbers perspective. It wasn't factoring in community thoughts or what the community members who live there would think about that decision as well. And I think, once again, that those are all things before our last meeting, we would want to make sure that those opinions are brought forward and factored in before an actual decision's made. Last thing I'll just say on that is some of these numbers were hard to pick a scenario, just looking at the numbers and the percentages. So I'll also say, not knowing what the district's 3, 4, 5-year plan may be to add capacity at each of the schools, it's hard cutting out certain neighborhoods and saying this would be the boundary because we need to stay at this many classrooms or this amount of percentage students at this school without knowing if there are potentials for modulars or extra space or what some of those extra services may be. So I know that's a parking lot item, but it's noteworthy to mention. It's hard to make that actual boundary decision without knowing kind of some of those logistical future options as well.
Okay. Others on that group, anything to add about what your discussion? And I'll ask you too, Dave. Did you land more on D than on C then because of the Milltown to Mark Twain?
That we had some discussion and it was really tough because I think most of us are thinking, well, that community, it is their backyard and they're used to they're used to the teachers and the community and the services at that school. And it's hard to think through, where will staff be at in both configurations, and will students have that much of a problem rolling with a change with the people that they're familiar with moving as well, potentially.
Okay. Any other comments, thoughts on this group, fourth group?
So we do have multiple comments in chat from committee members.
Right. And I would encourage you, well, let's see. I would encourage you to just go through and read those on the right of your screen as you have time. And Derek, did you change my screen or did I do something to where I'm not seeing everybody anymore? Maybe
I
that's a me
cannot
thing.
change your screen, but
You can do a lot of
if you
things.
only see one person,
I'll go to view. Okay, I got it.
yeah, there you
fixed.
go.
No problem. Okay.
I noticed Kevin's on here now. Could we take a pause since so many of us have said it would be nice to hear from him about capacity at Butte Creek?
Yes. So Kevin, can we ambush you?
Yeah. Hey guys, sorry I had to step out there for about an hour or so. What would you like to know about capacity of Butte Creek?
So part of the question here, Kevin, is the South Abaquah area, and one of the scenarios that the subgroup worked up was the South Abaquah area, which has, I believe, in the mid 20 students, 22, 25, something like that, students in that area. One of the scenarios would be sending them to Butte Falls, and the question was, can Butte Falls handle that if that was an option that they chose to go to?
Yeah, the answer to that would be absolutely.
Okay.
We could. Our school capacity is about 325, and we've been at that in the past. Some years. This year, of course, due to the circumstances everybody's seeing, we're at 230 right now.
Okay.
And a lot of those folks are not going to come back. Some will. So yeah, that kind of increase would be easy to accommodate.
So I guess let's have a discussion about South Abaquah and this committee's process, because I think it's really important. We started off this whole idea with making sure we have transparency. That's really been our key to the whole thing. When we had the discussions, it was around the boundaries, the in-town boundaries, and how do we divide those in a way, although we did say right up front, if need be, that may encroach in some others. But I think a lot of the reason you haven't had a whole lot of public comment is because you haven't thrown out ideas of others. I think this, for at least 25 kids, would probably bring some comments. But transparency continues to be hugely important in this process. And so if you chose to go with changing the boundaries in South Abaquah and Butte Creek and so forth, we probably also need to have a real clear process as to how you get to that. And maybe one more meeting's not enough if that's part of the mix. And maybe what you could do is put out 2 scenarios and you're going to get comments, or you could go with 1. We're going to get to a point here to where you individually are voting on which single one you like best, and we'll kind of see where that goes. But I think we as a group need to have some discussion about the positives and negatives of the whole Butte Creek, South Abaquah change right now. And is now the right time, or is a transition plan a better idea, or what are our thoughts on that?
Just ask a quick question.
Yeah, Liz.
And I used to teach at Scotts Mills, and I even had to ask Joni. I have no idea where South Abaquah is. Can you tell me? Because I'm from Portland. But anyway, she kind of let me know around where it was, and I just wanted to find out, is that not a consideration to also have them go to Scotts Mills? Like, are they closer to Butte Creek than Scotts Mills? Is that why we're saying Butte Creek? It would be another option. Sorry, I don't have my bearings on where.
No, they're about the same. That's about the same distance. By the time you get out 213 and take a right to go to Scotts Mills and continue on to Butte Creek, they're about equal.
Okay.
But like with North Abaquah, what it is when you turn right on North Abaquah, heading out of town, it's Butte Creek up until about when you pass Hazelnut Ridge Road, and then it's a few miles up. So it transitions then to Scotts Mills at that point. So, whether something similar would work, for the south part of Abaquah, I don't know, but that's how it does. That's how it works on the north end.
Okay. Other comments in support or in opposition to the idea at this point in the process, saying that we may move an in-town group of kids to an out-of-town school?
See, Michelle.
I feel like we should absolutely consider it. If it means some kids going to Butte Creek and they may want to go to Butte Creek, we don't even know that. The Butte Creek has capacity. And if it gets some kids out of a locker room where they need some, yeah. If it can get some kids out of a locker room, I think it makes all the sense in the world to talk about it now and go ahead and change it now if that's the right decision.
Okay. Does this bring heartburn? The thought of this bring heartburn to anybody going, oh geez, no, we don't want to do that?
I just somewhat, and I say that just in the sense that we're trying to make this decision based off of a capacity issue, where when you really, I think when we look at that geographic area, we're not looking at an area where we expect there to be a lot of development. We expect these to stay pretty much single family residents, and the amount of students to not change drastically. So we're looking at roughly 20 students, which to me, it doesn't seem like we can do it based off of a capacity issue for that few number of students.
Right. I know there's been some discussion in the chat about, capacity. That's really the question. And that's why the subgroup came up with this idea, was that worried about too many kids in town and how do we balance these schools in a way that we're going to not overload them. And so it's really a capacity question and possibly a capacity solution. One of your thoughts could also be that although Leslie's going to give us kind of the criteria they use for transfer, you could possibly say, okay, this area is now in the Butte Creek or whatever area you choose to put them in. And yet the kids that are there, those 20 some, would have first right to transfer into town if room was available. I keep saying you have so much more flexibility than what most districts have because of that transfer process. So you could ease the concern a little bit if you're going to go that way.
I was just going to ask that same question. If we do have open and, kids can go to any school they want to if there's room, I think that's a really good option to be able to say, if there's room, then you can come in. But I do really strongly believe it needs to be on the table. My other question was, if we're going to pick two, couldn't we put D and E and put them out there and see what happens? Because
you certainly can.
I mean,
actually, you can do anything you want. You guys are in charge.
What if people do want to go to Butte Creek? I mean, I think that we're making a lot of assumptions that they don't. So
I think the biggest challenge is that we've really had two different things going on here. One is a capacity question and the other one is process. The capacity, is just numbers, and those are pretty easy to look at. The process question is about, making sure that everybody knows what could happen to where their children are supposed to go to school. I think we've done a pretty good job of saying, hey, anybody in town or anybody who goes to, Mark Twain or Robert Frost, you're going to get divided up here, but you're going to go to Mark Twain or Robert Frost in our communication with the community. I do think it's going to be a really big surprise to the people in South Abequah if suddenly they're not supposed to go to that school anymore. And so I just am, I would guess that there'll be a pretty big feedback about that, and I could definitely be wrong. But process wise, it feels funky to me. So that's my comment. It doesn't mean that we have said this is your decision-making process. I just know that I want you to put yourself in their shoes for a second and think about all this time I've been thinking I'm either going to end up at Robert Frost or Mark Twain, and then suddenly I'm not. And nobody has communicated that to me, and it just all of a sudden is an edict. So just trying to think about how to manage that. If you're going to head in that direction, I think you really need to strongly consider what that means and how to manage it if you're going to think about choosing that as an option.
Yeah. One thing, and I agree, Rob. One thing I would add, and we've been through this actually with the North Abaquah. It was years ago, and then more recently with the monitor closure and the boundary adjustments out there with Butte Creek and Scotts Mills. But you know, if the South Abaquah talk continues, you know, I think the way to do that is to grandfather the families that are already attending town. You give them their choice. You run the buses both directions so that everybody can still have a bus ride, and it's not on them to drive. And then the families that want to stay in town, that have been, older siblings have already been there, can continue to do that, no problem. And then you take the new move-ins from a certain point forward, and then that's either Scotts Mills or Butte Creek or both.
Yeah, I think those, you know, those transition plans are kind of what you're going to have to think through if we go that route. Let's go to Courtney and then Joni after that.
I saw in the chat that Michelle Stadley brought up if you move the boundary for K-5, how does that affect the middle school in town? Will those kids be expected to go to Butte Creek or a rural school, or would they be going to Silverton Middle School?
Really good point. Don't have an answer, but a really good point. So, okay, Joni.
Yeah, I just want to, capacity keeps coming up, that word. And so I just want to really just walk people through that might not be thinking about this. Just really think about capacity critically. I know some of the numbers went out at 25 a classroom, but I don't know any sped room that we have that we house at 25, right? Those rooms are smaller. Kinder, we're never over 20 at Mark Twain, and I would assume we would continue with that. So you're talking several classrooms that aren't going to be at that 25 number. So when we're looking at the numbers that are going out there in capacity, we're really not at 25 every classroom. And so we, you know, thinking about those high numbers and then thinking about the reality of, like, for our SPED programs and our kinder programs, that we're not going to be at that 25 number, and that is going to take capacity down.
I would say that's going to take capacity down in the two buildings equally. Right. Okay. All right. Other thoughts?
Randy, we have
our...
a hand from Michelle Stadley.
Okay, Michelle.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Courtney, for bringing up that question. I just know of a family who lives on South Abaquah who has 2 middle school age kids, or will have next year. And so my question was just, would they be impacted, or would it only be families who have students in the K-5? So just putting that out there. But then the other thing that I keep thinking about is that our district currently has a long-range facilities plan, or like committee, that's working right now. So it feels like when we're making these decisions that are obviously like more immediate, that we should really be thinking long range as well, and trying to kind of align. Obviously, they're not quite as far in to their processing and planning as we are on this committee. But you know, if we can do some shifting to try to build more capacity at Butte Creek when they've lost student capacity, like, that's in their best interest. And if we can reserve some capacity for the growth that we know is coming to the Silverton area, for the long range thinking, I think it's definitely in our best interest to think those things through.
Okay. Dave.
Since I was the only one to object, I'll just say one more time, kind of in a different way, that I don't necessarily disagree with any of those that are providing this option to be able to think of the capacity. I was objecting, and I'm glad you brought up and said it better than I did, Rob. It's more of the process where, when you think about it, people will go back and view the recordings of these meetings from the very first meeting to the final decision. And in some of those first meetings, we identified a list of criteria that we felt was important to the community and we felt was important to us to move forward to guide our boundary decisions. It would be tough if we looked at some of the other things that we felt were highly important based off of haves and have-nots or some of the other criteria, and were to say, we're going to take a drastic shift from that process to move to kind of a different route. It's more of the process of, we identified we were going to go down a certain path, and although this does solve a potential issue, we need to recognize it does seem like a shift in what we said we were going to do versus what we're proposing as options, even though they are just options of here's D and E, take a look at them. I see it as a shift in what we originally set out to do.
And I would say that Rob's astute in talking about the two areas that we have to look at, one of which is process. And so one of the things, if we're going to look at, the South Abaquah area, one thing we may have to do is extend this process a little bit, because you have to have time. The worst thing we could do as a group is come together and all of a sudden people are shocked at the decision you make. That means we didn't communicate well enough, or when we did make a different decision than we were headed to, we gave enough time to process that so that people weren't blindsided. And so I think if we go that route, we certainly need to relook at what our timing is and what the steps are to get there or not get there based on that process. Melissa.
Mute.
Still on mute. There
Sorry.
you go.
I think we all recognize that it is a change in the process, but I think we also should recognize that we were given this task of creating this boundary. And right after our first meeting, an email went out December 3rd saying that we had talked about whether it was just this boundary or not.
Yeah.
And that in talking with district leadership further, it's clear that the hope is to have this committee draw a clean line. But if logistically that doesn't work, then there are other options. And I honestly, this subgroup, we tried everything. Like there aren't any other options.
No, I very well said. Christine.
Well, I don't think the values have changed. Our values were looking at SEL, and keeping neighborhoods together. Both of those things, balancing the schools and keeping the neighborhoods together was just a huge, huge priority. And so that hasn't changed. And it's focusing on the Milltown area and valuing that for them. That is, helping us think outside the box. And I think that in all processes, sometimes you discover that a different direction could be a good one. So I think it makes sense to have both options out there and just to ask families and see what they think. We may be wringing our hands over not much, just to keep both things on the table.
Okay, I'm going to take, let's do maybe one or two more comments if you have them, and then I'm going to call for the question. I'm going to make up the question, and then I'm going to ask you what that is.
I was just going to reiterate, sorry, I was just going to reiterate Kevin's suggestion of having these families be given the option of where they're going to go, like drawing this boundary and then giving them that option, or Aaron's suggestion of having them be, given first choice when it comes to transfers. I think that solves a lot of the issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that would certainly soften the change in the blow if we're going to go that direction. Derek, are you still on there? Because I'm going to need some help.
I sure am. I am ready and waiting to hear this question. I'm going to rapidly type into the poll.
Perfect. And so I think what I want to know is what you think we ought to send out to the community as the place, the boundary that we're currently looking at. And I'm going to give you the choice of C, D, E, or D and E combined. Okay, now let me take that off because I'm making this up as I go. Really, there was not a lot of support for C. There just wasn't a lot. So do you think we ought to send out D, E, or both of those? Those would be the three options. So you want to wordsmith that, Derek, and make it sound really good.
Can I
Oh, it's going to
clarify?
read exactly like you just asked it, actually.
Randy, what do you mean by send out there?
So I think it's important for us to put some sort of communication out after this meeting. Say, look, we've met 5 times. These were the things that are really important to us. And here's a picture of what we see, what our scenario being. This is our thought right now. We need your input on it. Or we see these 2 scenarios. It draws out like this, or it draws out like this. We want your input on it. And if you're going to include E, I would think that we'd probably have somebody district or committee wise start reaching out to some of those families that would be impacted, so that, again, you got to be aware of their not being shocked. So do you think the best plan is D, the best plan is E, or you think right now we still ought to entertain both those plans and continue down the road, which may take us a little longer? Okay. I don't know how it will be worded, but I think you will get a survey question.
It will
that
come
you
up
will-
in just a moment.
The master, the Oz over there, is just about done with it.
And
Okay, there it is.
answer this question. Who gets to answer this question? Just committee members?
That would only be committee members. And so if you're a committee member, then, although I think it might have come up with viewers as well, right? Just because everybody that's on sees it.
That's correct, but I can see who
Yeah.
answers. So
Okay, so committee members only, check either D, E, or if you think both D and E still need to be considered and sent out to people, then choose both of those. Okay, go ahead and answer that.
with the number of respondents at, I believe, exactly the number in the work group,
Okay,
we have 9 indicating E and 11 indicating both D and E, with 0 indicating D only.
okay. So with 11 D and E, I would say, and so what I'm seeing there is everybody thinks either D or E is going to be the option. I'm going to do another survey here just so I get your leaning as a group to where you have to choose either D or E. Could you do that for us, Derek?
One moment, please.
And again, that may not be the route we go. So I just want to know where you're standing right now.
And again,
Okay.
this is work group members only, please.
So D or E, make your choice there so we can see where we're at.
Okay, with that same 20 responding, we have 4 responses in favor of D and 16 in favor of E.
Well, there you go. Okay. So as we look at how to move forward, we need to be very thoughtful and proactive in how you get information out there, whether you do, present both, whether you just present one as saying these are the boundaries that we're looking at. You were 11 to 9, that's not 75% as far as how that goes. That's just barely over 50-50. And so let's have a quick discussion, as I know our time's going to run out before we're done with the things we need to do tonight, about the advantages or disadvantages of sending both D and E out as options.
Randy, if I could real quick, just as both in my role as the person who sort of represents the community back to the district and also referencing something that was said a little earlier, largely we don't really have representatives from the South Abaquah area in this meeting. And I would also say that a lot of the folks we have here are primarily representatives of sort of in-town communities with limited representation from rural. I think I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't throw out there that without that discussion of the fact that there is an alternative option with folks in those rural communities, I think that that's a hard sell for me as a communications person in terms of not telling them at all. But it's not my call, and I just wanted to share that that perspective, because I think that it's one that we've heard tonight already from our rural representatives, and also one that I think we would hear if we didn't share that option existed.
So,
so
I just want to be
go
clear
ahead.
what you said. Your concern is that if all we send out is E, that people might think that's the only option on the table because they would never ever hear about D as a possibility.
Yeah, my concern would be that so first of all, you should know that the practice that we have utilized throughout this process is to share all documents from these proceedings onto the website. So folks will be aware, in theory, sort of if we, once we load them on there, they'll be able to go through and see everything that we talked about tonight, and that still is the planned practice. That said, these meeting videos are pretty long, and I don't expect most are really watching them. And so if sort of in the communication that we put out, we say, here are these 5 and here's the one, that would be my hesitance. And again, that's just in my role, kind of representing community back to the district. So
right, and in my role as process, my recommendation would be that having both those out there is good for you as a committee, because it allows you to get input on both, even though the differences are not great in these two, but to get both those out there for people to consider and comment on, it gives a choice rather than feeling like, like if when we did our first 5 maps thing, if Steve would have brought one option to you and said, this kind of what we came up, you'd have felt like they're just kind of saying, well, this is it. And yet, you have other options on the table and other discussions to be had. So I would encourage you that when we do a communication, we say these are the 2 things, which, it's 9 to 11 in that vote, that these are the 2 things that you're considering moving forward.
And I think a communication can be, however, there is a strong leaning amongst committee members that E is likely to be the choice, but we want you to see these 2 and get feedback. Just straight up honest communication about where this sits.
So Erin Scott has her hand up.
Okay, Erin.
I'm wondering, so I know that it was about 22 kids, I believe. So definitely not 22 families, I don't think. would it be possible to just get a hold of them and ask, or to have just one more, even if it was a shorter meeting, just where we can put these out, let people look at them and, give some public feedback? I'm just wondering if that's a possibility.
Yeah, I think that would have to happen.
The other question I had, or maybe a comment, I feel like part of how this is going to go over is how it's worded. I think if it's instead of oh, we're so sorry, this is where we came up with, well, that's probably not going to go over well. But if it's a exciting, a creative idea, I mean, I think that we just have to be positive, and with those options, people that don't want to do this will be the first, on the transfer list, just all of those things. I feel like it's going to be received better if we're careful about how it's worded.
Right. No, very true. Do you have concerns about putting both out there in the communication after this meeting? Say these are two options. Are you okay with that? If you have a concern, let me know what it is.
I'm concerned if they feel like they're deciding. I'm concerned that we're giving them the power to decide when we have a committee to work on this.
Right. No, I don't. We're not. I'm not insinuating we're taking a vote. I'm insinuating that we're informing them of where you are in the process. And right now you have these two that you're considering. You pretty much eliminated everything else. These are the two that we continue to look at.
I think what we would want to do is provide them with the opportunity to give you feedback before you make the decision.
Absolutely. Dan.
I'm concerned with sending out option E when we haven't really discussed recommendations of how that process would look for those families, for that grandfathering in process of what that may look like, or the options of whatever else we would possibly recommend to the district, with just E going out by itself and not having some of that backbone of what we expect that process to look like, just showing it out there as an option alone, as a standalone.
So you're saying have some of the resolution, some of the things that would soften this along with the proposal.
Agreed.
Yes.
In that beginning meeting, we identified the criteria of having room and capacity for the students currently in that boundary. So I would like to see with option E, this is what we're thinking. If we do go with this option, this is what it would look like.
Okay, I think that makes total sense. We've thrown out several different ideas tonight. I thought, I thought Kevin had some good thoughts. There was, also the ideas that, the first transfer opportunities for in district, grandfathering the people, the families that are there now. There's a lot of things that would really alleviate a lot of the fear from people if they live in this area. And so we could certainly come up with a list of those. And I think that would be a district, leadership. You need to figure out logistically how that all fits together, but could certainly put together some information that would lessen the concern for this group, yet maybe solve the problem long-term that you're looking at. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. So with that in mind, let's say that we will put together a form of communication with Derek's help and Steve and so forth that would put these two scenarios, hopefully with maps showing kind of where the boundaries would be. And I know that we've had several conversations about how best to get this out. And Melissa, I think it was you that had some suggestions about formats of where people are seeing their information. And so making sure that we can use the avenues we need so that everybody sees it, and then be able to come back and take input. And you'll get input both on South Abaquah, but you're also going to get input on, all your other lines in town. And then I would also say that Steve, you would, or Scott, you would probably identify somebody off your team that would start making contact with these families and just have that discussion. You just don't want to be blindsided as a family. And so part of that discussion with the South Abaquah, just so they're aware. Okay. Okay. We will move forward with that. We've got a bunch of things left to do, and so I'm going to move on to the next part, and that will be, I wanted you to kind of hear what the district is thinking, what they currently do with transfers, and what they're thinking as we move forward. Again, this was not really with South Abaquah at all in mind, but just in general, what our plans, and I know Leslie was going to do this for us.
And if Derek lets me share my screen, I'll share slides so it goes.
He's kind of stingy about that.
It can be. That's one of those things that you don't want to just leave so that everybody can do it just by default. That's just my experience.
Or we'd be looking at Rob's fish pictures.
That's right. You should be good now, Leslie.
Okay. There, can you guys all see that?
Yes.
We good? Okay. So we have a policy, a couple policies and ARs and whatnot. JECBB, if you like to look it up and read them all. Intra-district transfers are from Silverton School to Silverton School. Inter-district transfers are from other districts to Silver Falls School District. Intra-district transfers are prioritized over inter-district transfers. For both of these transfers, we have a formal window, January to April, for the following school year. So people can submit their transfers during this window. Our window closes April 1st. We then go through, and if you are an intra-district transfer, you'll be prioritized over inter-district transfers. And then those are all handed to principals, and they will, if they have space, they accept transfers. Now there's some particulars to that I'll get to in just a second. Now, if you are looking to transfer in the middle of the school year, it's outside of the window and you want to transfer immediately, that is a first come, first served basis for both intra and inter. You must provide your own transportation for both types of transfers. If you are an intra-district transfer and you have been, your kindergartner is accepted into a school and you have a younger sibling that you also apply for a transfer, the sibling may be given preference. And that's only in the intra-district transfer policy. And principals make all of these decisions based completely on capacity. I have 12 kindergartners and I can have 15 in this class. I have 3 openings. It's a pretty simple, usually based on numbers. For inter-district transfers, it does last for K-12. So once you're into our district, you're in for all of the schools that you potentially would go through. So in our in-town boundary currently, if you get in at Mark Twain, you're also in for Robert Frost, Silverton Middle School, and Silverton High School. And finally, there is a lottery process for inter-district transfers. If there's only 3 spaces and we have 5 transfer requests, there's a anonymous lottery process that is done at the district level to choose which 3 transfers would be going.
And Leslie, just to make sure people know this, once a student is accepted, they are for the duration of K-12, and that's state law. That's not a decision that the district makes separately.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, questions about what we currently do as far as transfers are concerned? That's all pretty straightforward. Rob needs to have, or is going to lead you kind of with the discussion of with those as the basis of what you currently do, what things would you do differently in the scope of the process of changing to 2 K-5 schools? And what things do you want to consider as far as recommendations that you would make to the district? So Rob?
And Leslie, just to check, did you have anything else that you were going to share? Okay.
No, that was it. I really boiled it down to the nuts and bolts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those things are in board policy. So those have been voted on and adopted by the board. So those are what they are and are not a part of the purview of this committee.
Mhm.
But what is part of the purview of this committee is to think about like any kind of phase-in plan that that people would have between one of the 2 schools. So should there be any consideration about any of the kids who are currently in school and having them immediately next year attend the school once the boundaries are drawn? So if I'm a 4th grader this year and I want to stay at the school where I currently am, do I get to do that? Or if we redraw the boundary, do I need to move next year? One of the hallmarks of this conversation with this committee has been about the number of transitions that a student needs to make. And so part of the reason that the K-5 decision was made was to reduce the number of transitions that a student has to endure over the course of their elementary career. In the past, there's always been at least 1 transition, right? I guess 3 throughout their time. I become a kindergartner, and then I change between 2nd and 3rd grade, and then I move on to be a 6th grader. And so, but there's always been that one kind of extra transition in the model that you all have had. And so people have come to expect that there would be 1 transition. The question is, should there be anything that you all think about in allowing people to be students to be grandfathered in where they are around this particular decision? And so what I want you to do is I want you to just be thinking for a little bit. We're going to brainstorm this just a little bit to see if anybody on the committee has suggestions about any kind of grandfathering or change process between this year and next year that would allow some families or some kids some flexibility. So I want you to be thinking about that. There's been great conversation tonight and people have spoken up. It's been really good. Sometimes when I've said, let's brainstorm things, or when Randy has said that, it's been very quiet out there. And so one of the things we said we would do would be to call on people. I'm going to give you about 30-second think time. I'm sure some of you have been thinking about this for a while, to think about when I call on you, what your response is going to be about the possibility of any kind of a transfer or phase in these boundaries, and to have you give your thoughts or your opinion about what the district may want to consider around that. Does that make sense? Okay, your 30 seconds is going. I would also say just have the district leave it the way it is and move forward as one of the options. Okay, good enough. So I'm just going to call on a few people, and after we get going, then I'll open it up to anybody who hasn't gotten a chance to speak. Courtney, good. What are your thoughts on this?
Since it is new K-5 schools, I'm not sure that people necessarily need to stay at the school that they were previously at. My preference would be to keep it as is. So they go to the school in their boundary, and then if they if they can ask to transfer between schools.
So basically the same rules that the district has now.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Nicole, what are your thoughts?
I'm kind of feeling like both ways, honestly, because I see the one hand where you have students who are already at one school, and then it might be really hard for that transition if they're not in that boundary anymore. But then I also worry about the capacity issues, because that's what we've been talking about here. So I'm not sure if it could be a case by case or, you know, some sort of process. I'm just seeing it as a capacity issue also too. But I also do worry about those students who that transition is very hard for them also. And so allowing them to maybe sort of apply or some sort of lottery system, I'm not sure, but allowing that maybe.
Okay, great. Thank you. Marciela, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Nicole. Leave it as is, but do it on a case by case basis.
Okay, great. Kyle, how about you?
Well, I think it's first come, first serve as of right now, an intra-district transfer, which there might be a stronger need for certain students over others in that process. So that's something to look at as well. I don't know how you do that. I don't know if it's teacher recommendation or, I mean, it has to start with the parent first, but that's just something to look at, not just a lottery system.
Okay, thank you. Other Kyle.
Yeah, thanks. I think leaving it the way it is makes the most sense. I'm not an educator, or right now I'm not a parent, grandparent, but my experience with explaining things and dropping new changes onto the community is it's better just to do it. I think if you give people the right to pick and choose, you're going to have a logistical mess. You'll need another department head just to sort that out constantly. And that prolongs the get over it period for the community, in my opinion. So I think it's better just to do it and then be done with it. Certainly, there's exceptions to every rule, but I would make that a very narrow consideration.
All right, thank you. Julie, what are your thoughts?
I'm with Kyle Palmer and Maricela. I think a case by case basis.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. I can tell everybody's gotten really good at these meetings because everybody's remembering to unmute. Good job. Okay, let's open it up. Anybody else who wants to speak to this? Melissa.
I think that regardless of which we do, leaving it as it is, first come, first serve, or if we try to create a process, I think that either way, we should put a equity lens on it, because even if it's first come, first serve, or if there's some sort of process, you could end up with big differences in how the diversity of the schools look. And that's the priority that we set for ourselves, but the community set was we don't want that. So I think we really need to make sure that we have some sort of equity lens on it.
All right, thank you. Krista.
I think the existing process is good. I do think equity is important, but I also think that you need to consider kids that have IEPs for anxiety or trauma, and consider prioritizing them, because that could be a really big traumatic event, another traumatic event on top of trauma.
Okay, thank you. Erin.
I was actually thinking exactly what Nicole said, that I do want us to be very careful about capacity, but also on a case by case and needs basis, to really take a look at those kiddos who really are going to struggle with one more transition. And for a variety of reasons, with IEPs and all that. I also do agree with Melissa, though, that equity piece needs to be in consideration with that too.
Thanks, Erin. Kyle.
If we don't allow intra-district transfers, I'm guessing that would have to go throughout the whole district. That's something you might have to change as a district policy too,
Right.
if you're not allowing them in town.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Dave.
I'm an advocate. I mean, going back to the purpose of the K-5 transition is for a better student experience. And I'm an advocate for creating some loose criteria and providing some what I don't want to have happen is the district become like a flight attendant where you're assigning seats and changing back and forth. And the changes, I mean, if you approve, that means that change could go back the other way and not having to deal with that administrative process. I also recognize this is different than just the normal rules around transfers, just because it is establishing two new schools different than a normal transfer. So if there was some loose criteria that was student focused to give people an idea of what some of those exceptions may be, to kind of steer them and point them that these exceptions are, you know, some fairly high level needs, as opposed to just a, well, I want process.
All right, thank you. I'm looking to see if anybody else has a hand up. If you have a hand up, just jump in because I'm not seeing it.
I think the more we deviate from the process the district already has in place, the more complicated we're making these issues. I definitely would be in support of an idea of having, for this particular instance, having some sort of rubric or something that allows for special circumstances to take precedent over just a first come, first served basis. I definitely think we need to keep an equity lens on it. And if we had a student who, for example, was a 5th grader and wanted to stay at Robert Frost and was on an IEP, like that kid should take precedence over, you know, somebody else because of one less transition being in the best interest of that student. But the more we can just keep it in line with the practice that the district is already using, the easier it's going to be for our community, the easier it's going to be for everybody who has to deal with this process when it comes time to actually implementing it.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Anybody else want to jump in?
That would be the Kyle Palmer example of pull the Band-Aid off, get it over with, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, so this is one of the things, you know, that we said that we were going to have decisions on before we were done with the committee. And so we'll need to have everybody be thinking about this as and what you just heard from everyone, and be thinking about this as we start to move into next week's meeting. And it will give us a little bit of time to be thinking about what we heard too and come up with a couple proposals that you all can get to consensus on. Does that make sense? All right.
I think we also need to ask the district, their kind of thoughts and plans as to how that transition works, and have that whole discussion here so that everybody's on the same page. And we haven't really talked a lot about that, Scott. So I think that's something for the next meeting that we can have you guys ready to say, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking. The committee can weigh in at that point.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Really thoughtful comments, by the way, by the committee members. Thank you guys for your input. I thought there were some really nice comments there. Good job.
Very good. All right, as we head to the next meeting, but between now and the next meeting, we're going to send out, again, targeted information about where we are. And I would expect this is going to gain some discussion out there, because with that, we need to send out maps that show, and we need to do that in a positive manner, a way that we're actually reaching out to people rather than having them come look at the website to figure out where that's going to be. And that may be involved, that might involve the principals. Greg, you guys at your particular buildings may be able to push that out, because that's a lot of where the influence is going to be. And, make sure that Kevin and others do the same thing as we start looking outside. Scott, we'll be in discussion about how best we can roll that out. Our next meeting is scheduled for February 1st. And that's supposed to be our last meeting, but does not have to be. I think Scott said we really wanted to have something to the board by March. Rob and I get a little bit busy this time of year, so we said we thought we needed to be done by February. but we do have the opportunity to extend if we need to. And so we'll play the next meeting by ear. And if we're in a place to where we can make a decision, great. And if we're not, then we'll do some more until we get it right. Okay. It's a long night, fantastic discussion, unbelievable input and influence on this. You truly have taken this on and gained the ownership that you need and use the collective knowledge that you have in order to think outside the box and really put some things on the table that have great solutions within them. And so really appreciate the work that you've done on that. You will hear and see stuff from us here in the next 3 or 4 days, and we'll get stuff out. Other than that, we'll see y'all face to face, kind of in this manner, on February 1st. That's a Monday night. So thank you very much. You guys have a nice evening.